The 28th of July, 1940, Salzburg, Austria. Shortly after the fall of France, and while the defeat of the United Kingdom and victory for Nazi Germany seemed likely, the German dictator Adolf Hitler organizes a conference with Slovak politicians seeking to use the favorable conditions to demand the expulsion of the moderate faction from the Slovak government and its replacement by members of the pro-German radical branch. The Führer hints that the failure to comply will leave the Slovak State at the mercy of Hungary by revoking the protection guarantees that Slovakia had obtained 1 year earlier. The Slovaks concede to the German ultimatum. At the Salzburg Conference, the radical wing is represented by the Slovak Prime Minister, who 2 years later, between March and October 1942, will be a driving force behind deportations of 58,000 Slovak Jews to Nazi concentration camps in German-occupied Poland, where virtually all of them will be killed. His name is Vojtech Tuka. Vojtech Tuka, the son of a teacher Anton Tuka and his wife Helena, was born on the 4th of July, 1880, in Piarg, today's Stavnické Báne, then part of Austria-Hungary. Young Vojtech was a protege of Ferdinand Coburg, then the ruling prince and later Tsar of Bulgaria, who owned vast lands in the area of Stavnické Báne, where Tuka lived. Tuka also became a tutor to his son and to the heir of the throne, Boris III. Ferdinand Coburg made it possible for Tuka to study law in Budapest and later financed his studies in Paris and Berlin. In 1901, Tuka received his doctorate in law and became the youngest professor in the Kingdom of Hungary, teaching law at Pécs, and from 1914 to 1919 at the Elizabethan University in Bratislava. On the 28th of October 1918, the Czechoslovak National Council in Prague proclaimed the independence of Czechoslovakia. It included the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia, Slovakia, the province of Subcarpathian Rus, which occupied the eastern region of Czechoslovakia, and portions of Austrian Silesia. 50% of the Czechoslovak population consisted of Czechs. Germans and Slovaks accounted for 22% and 16% respectively, the rest being Hungarians, Ukrainians, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish. In 1922, Vojtech Tuka joined the Slovak People's Party, a far-right clerico-fascist political party with an authoritarian ideology. The party had been founded by Andrej Hlinka, a Slovak Catholic priest, in 1913. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of World War I and the formation of Czechoslovakia in October 1918, Andrej Hlinka was opposing Czechoslovakism, which underlined the reciprocity of the Czechs and the Slovaks, and demanded Slovak autonomy. Vojtech Tuka, who supported the independence of Slovakia, quickly became one of the party leaders, and in 1923 he founded the organization Rodobrana, or the Home Guard, which was a paramilitary organization of the Slovak People's Party and predecessor of the Hlinka Guard, which was known for its participation in the Holocaust in Slovakia, as its members appropriated Jewish property and rounded up Jews for deportation in 1942. Between 1925 to 1929, Tuka represented Hlinka's Slovak People's Party at the National Assembly in Prague. On the 1st of January 1928, Tuka published an article titled Vacuum Juris, alleging that there had been a suppressed annex to the 30th of October 1918 Martin Declaration, which was a declaration of independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire that presaged Slovakia's unification with the Czech lands as part of the new state of Czechoslovakia. This annex, according to Tuka, stated that the declaration was, by agreement, to be valid for only 10 years, and after 30 October 1928, he claimed Prague's writ would no longer run Slovakia. The aim of the article was to activate radical autonomists in Hlinka's Slovak People's Party. However, Tuka was stripped of his parliamentary immunity, arrested, and taken to a remand prison in Bratislava. In a trial in October 1929 that provoked reactions at home and abroad, he was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison for treason and paid espionage in favor of Hungary. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came into power in Germany. The Nazi regime began not only to restrict the civil and human rights of the Jews, establishing the first concentration camps, but it also demanded the return of the Sudetenland to the German Reich. The Sudetenland was a border area of Czechoslovakia on which the ethnic German population of Czechoslovakia, more than 20% of the country's population, lived. This part of Czechoslovakia also contained the Czechoslovak army's defensive positions in the event of a war with Germany. when over the 3 days between the 11th and 13th of March 1938, Adolf Hitler annexed the federal state of Austria into the German Reich. The failure of the British and French to take action against him for violating the Versailles Treaty emboldened him toward further aggression. In late summer 1938, Hitler threatened to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland was ceded to Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy and Germany held a conference in Munich between the 29th and 30th of September 1938, and in what became known as the Munich Agreement, they agreed to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. The Czechoslovaks were not invited to the conference and felt that they had been betrayed by the British and French governments. On the 30th of September 1938, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, on his return from Munich, made a peace for our time declaration, believing he had averted war. However, this peace would not last long. As a result of the Munich Agreement, the leaders of the democratic governments in Czechoslovakia resigned. President Beneš left the country for France, and Slovakia was granted significant autonomy. At that time, Vojtech Tuka was already a free man. In 1937, after his release from prison to house arrest, Tuka, who was a major supporter of an independent Slovakia, acted as a leader of the extreme right-wing, pro-German elements of the Hlinka Slovak People's Party, originally the Slovak People's Party, which was then under the command of Catholic priest Andrej Hlinka. Hlinka had died in August 1938, only a few weeks before the Munich Conference took place, and Jozef Tiso, also a Slovak priest, became Hlinka's successor. During the late autumn of 1938, Tuka was already fully advocating the independence of Slovakia. In a greeting telegram to Adolf Hitler, Tuka even offered him the military alliance for the defense and support of European civilization. On the 12th of February 1939, Tuka visited the Führer and, without any constitutional function, credentials or authorization, declared that he was placing the fate of the Slovak nation in Hitler's hands. On the 9th of March 1939, Czech troops moved into Slovakia in reaction to radical calls for independence from Slovak agitators, including Vojtech Tuka. On the 13th of March, Adolf Hitler took advantage of this Homolov putsch, prompting Jozef Tiso, the Slovak ex-prime minister and Roman Catholic priest deposed by the Czech troops, to declare Slovak independence on the 14th of March by an act of the Slovak Assembly. One day later, on the 15th of March, Nazi Germany invaded and occupied the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia in flagrant violation of the Munich Agreement. Tiso became Prime Minister of the new Slovak State on the 14th of March 1939, and after he was chosen as president on the 26th of October of the same year, he immediately appointed Tuka as Prime Minister. Slovakia became a Nazi puppet state, whose followers established a fascist authoritarian, one-party dictatorship, strongly influenced by the separatist Catholic clerical hierarchy and internal policy, and closely allied with Nazi Germany. The ruling party was the Hlinka Slovak People's Party. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. In April 1940, the first Aryanization law was passed in Slovakia, which meant the seizure of Jewish-owned property and exclusion of Jews from the economy. This was justified by the stereotype and reinforced by the propaganda that Jews obtained their wealth by oppressing Slovaks. In mid-July 1940, Adolf Hitler invited Tiso, Tuka, and Alexander Mach, the commander of the paramilitary Hlinka Guard, to a summit held in Salzburg. The summit took place during a quiet spell in the war, shortly after the fall of France, and while the defeat of the United Kingdom and victory for Nazi Germany appeared likely. Germany's military successes strengthened its negotiating position against its much smaller ally. The Germans demanded the expulsion of the Nastup faction of the Slovak People's Party from the Slovak government because the Nastup faction opposed the imitation of Germany and insisted on an independent foreign policy. The Germans threatened to unilaterally revoke the protection guarantees that Slovakia had obtained in the 1939 German-Slovak Treaty and leave the Slovak state at the mercy of Hungary. The result was Slovak capitulation to the German demands and the replacement of Nastup supporters by members of the pro-German radical faction. The conference also resulted in Vojtech Tuka becoming a Slovak foreign minister and the Slovak state becoming more strongly oriented towards Germany, especially in the area of anti-Jewish measures. Another result of the Salzburg talks was the appointment of various German advisors to Slovakia. One of them was SS Hauptsturmführer Dieter Wisliceny, with whom Tuka composed the Jewish Code, which the Tiso government passed on the 9th of September 1941, and government propaganda boasted that it was the strictest set of anti-Jewish laws in Europe. Based on the Nazi Nuremberg laws, it comprised 270 articles and was longer than the Slovak constitution. This law comprehensively denied rights to Slovak Jews and definitively excluded Jews from public life, restricting hours that they were allowed to travel and shop, and barring them from clubs, organizations, and public events. It also required, among many others, that Jews wear the yellow star, annulled all debts owed to Jews, and confiscated Jewish property. When some of the government members disagreed with the introduction of National Socialism in Slovakia, Tuka said, "I am not a Democrat." During World War II, there were two major alliances, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The three principal partners in what was eventually referred to as the Axis alliance were Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the 24th of November 1940, Vojtech Tuka and Joachim von Ribbentrop, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Nazi Germany, signed a protocol entering Slovakia into alliance with Germany, Japan, and Italy. In fulfillment of the requirements of the Axis partnership, Slovakia participated in the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 and declared war on Britain and the United States in December of the same year. On the 6th of July 1941, shortly after the invasion of the Soviet Union, Tuka told Slovak soldiers going to the front, "I am proud that you are helping to create a new Europe alongside the most powerful army in the world. The eyes of the whole planet are on you. You are part of a broad international coalition defending the values of Western civilization against the terror of the East." For the Slovak Jews, the worst was yet to come. According to a census of the 15th of December 1940, there were 89,000 Jews in Slovakia. In March 1942, the Slovak State signed an agreement with Germany that permitted the deportation of Slovak Jews. Slovakia was the first state outside direct German control to agree to the deportation of its Jewish citizens. Between March and October 1942, some 58,000 Slovak Jews were concentrated in indigenously established labor and concentration camps, mainly in the camps Sereď, Nováky, and Vichne. The Slovak authorities then transported the Jews to the border of the Government General, or the German Reich, and turned them over to the German SS and police. One of the main forces behind the deportation of Slovak Jews to Nazi concentration camps in German-occupied Poland was the Slovak Prime Minister, Vojtech Tuka. The Hlinka Guard, Slovakia's state police, most willingly participated in these deportations. The victims were given only 4 hours warning to prevent them from escaping. Beatings and forcible shaving were commonplace, as was subjecting Jews to invasive searches to uncover hidden valuables. Some members of the Hlinka Guard took advantage of their power to rape Jewish women. In 1942, President Jozef Tiso gave a speech in which he justified ongoing deportations of Slovak Jews. Hitler commented after his speech, saying, "It is interesting how this little Catholic priest, Tiso, is sending us the Jews." Virtually all of the deported Slovak Jews were killed in Auschwitz, Majdanek, Sobibór, and other locations in German-occupied Poland. Only 300 of them survived. Among them were Alfred Wetzler and Rudolf Vrba, who escaped from Auschwitz in the spring of 1944 and compiled the first detailed report on operations there for general dissemination to the West. Jews who were not deported were granted presidential exception as they were crucial for the war economy. During Tiso's presidency, the Slovak state paid Germany 500 Reichsmarks for every deported Jew for what they called retraining and accommodation. In total, the Slovak state paid Nazi Germany 10 million Reichsmarks for murdering its citizens, the Slovak Jews, in Nazi death camps. During the deportations, some 6,000 Slovak Jews escaped to Hungary. When the papal nuncio reached the Tiso government that the German authorities were murdering the Slovak Jews in German-occupied Poland, the Slovak president hesitated and then refused to deport the remaining 24,000 Jews in Slovakia in the autumn of 1942. A report by the SD, the intelligence agency of the Nazi SS, stated that the reason for the sudden halt was a meeting called by Tuka on the 11th of August 1942. At that meeting, Tuka and the Secretary General of the Industrial Union told the ministers that Slovakia's economy could not withstand continued deportation of the Jews, causing the council to order the halt. Between March and October 1942, when the deportations took place, virtually all of the deported Slovak Jews were killed in Auschwitz, Majdanek, Sobibór, and other locations in German-occupied Poland. Vojtech Tuka participated in the plundering of Jewish property. In 1997, the Swiss Bankers Association published a list of World War II-era Swiss bank account holders with dormant accounts. The list included the name of Vojtech Tuka. By 1943, Tuka's health had deteriorated to a point where his political activities were significantly diminished, and in the beginning of 1944, he was planning his resignation. Though the German Foreign Minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, insisted on his remaining in office despite his poor health, Tuka resigned on the 5th of September, 1944, a few days after the outbreak of the Slovak National Uprising. The Slovak National Uprising began on the 29th of August, 1944, when the Slovak communist and non-communist underground rose against the Tiso regime as Soviet troops entered neighboring Subcarpathian Rus. Because the Tiso government was not able to quell the uprising, German troops moved in. Einsatzgruppe H, Nazi mobile death squads, whose duties included rounding up and killing or deporting the remainder of the Slovak Jews, accompanied the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, into Slovakia. Between September 1944 and the end of the year, German units deported approximately 12,600 Slovak Jews, most of them to Auschwitz, Theresienstadt, and other camps in Germany. Only about half of them survived. A few thousand Jews who were caught in hiding or fighting with the partisans in Slovakia were killed by the German soldiers and Slovak Hlinka Guard units. The Slovak National Uprising lasted from August until the 28th of October, 1944, and on the 30th of October of the same year, in Banská Bystrica in Slovakia, Jozef Tiso personally decorated German soldiers who had brutally suppressed the uprising. In all, German and Slovak authorities deported more than 70,000 Jews from Slovakia. The Germans murdered more than 60,000 of them. By the end of the Holocaust, more than 2/3 of the Jews living in Slovakia had been murdered. When the Red Army conquered the last parts of Slovakia, having already suffered a stroke which confined him to a wheelchair, Tuka, like other representatives of the regime, fled together with his wife Božena, nursing attendants, and personal doctor to Austria, where he was arrested by Allied troops following the capitulation of Germany. On the 13th of December, 1945, he was handed over to the officials of the renewed Czechoslovakia. In Prague, a medical examination followed, after which the doctor stated that Tuka was no longer intellectually responsive at all and was completely passive. He was then transported to Bratislava. The preparatory proceedings began in February 1946. Complications, but also questions, were caused by the poor health of Vojtech Tuka, who had been interrogated several times while lying in the hospital where he had been placed. He was unable to be questioned for long periods of time, stopped responding after half an hour, and his interrogations were therefore interrupted. However, the doctors who examined Tuka said that he was fit to stand trial. The trial began on the 29th of July, 1946, and Vojtech Tuka faced 4 charges. That, as a citizen of Czechoslovakia, and at the same time a high representative of the fascist organization Hlinka Guard, he contributed to the disintegration of the post-Munich Czechoslovakia. That he largely supported Germany's military, political, and economic interests, and at the same time, he intended to harm the war effort of the Soviet Union and the Allies. That he was instrumental in declaring war on the Soviet Union and the Allies, and the last charge accused him of being involved in crimes against humanity. Tuka denied guilt and claimed that he had never acted maliciously. On the contrary, according to his own statements, he acted under pressure of the events and for the good of the Slovak people. Tuka stated that he had proceeded from the historical fallacy that after the Munich Agreement, Slovakia could only save itself by having good relations with Germany. Tuka argued that given the historical circumstances, he could not actually have acted otherwise, and that he had never sought independence for Slovakia. To the accusation that he had even met Hitler in February 1939, Tuka replied that he did not even know in advance whom he would meet in Berlin. He also denied that he had initiated or participated in the convening of the Salzburg negotiations, stating that the negotiations had been organized by the German side, and he only wanted to thank Hitler for sending him a telegram for his birthday. According to the testimonies, Vojtech Tuka practically resigned himself to the trial and devoted himself more to the prayer book and to the rosary. In his defense, Tuka often stated that President Jozef Tiso had agreed with his actions, or at least had been informed of them. During his last speech, Tuka admitted that he had caused harm in his actions, but reiterated that he had always acted with the intention of serving the nation. He concluded by expressing regret for his actions and asked the court for a more lenient sentence, taking into account that he was an unfortunate, harmless, and broken old man. However, his lies did not help him escape justice. On the 14th of August, 1946, the Slovak National Tribunal of Bratislava sentenced Vojtech Tuka to death by hanging. At the same time, he was sentenced to the loss of his civil rights and the confiscation of all his property. Vojtech Tuka was 66 years old when he was executed in the courtyard of the regional court prison in Bratislava on the 20th of August, 1946, and his execution became a theatre of horror. Because Tuka was practically immobile at the time, he was brought to the execution site in a wheelchair, from which he was carried under the gallows and hanged. Tuka's execution started at 5:38 a.m., and he was executed in such a way that his horrible convulsing lasted 10 long minutes before he died. Today, Vojtech Tuka is a symbol of how corrupted and pro-fascist politicians can poison the nation with hatred and involve it in atrocities, which one from the other, step by step, and without any foreknowledge of the consequences, might lead to terror and murder. There were no tears shed for Vojtech Tuka. Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.